The sun was barely peeking over the Sacramento foothills when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery rolling down Riverside Meadows Drive. I was up on my roof checking the morning dew on my ginseng plants when I spotted the bulldozer turning the corner toward my house. Patricia Blackwood stood beside her white BMW in the street below, arms crossed, wearing that satisfied smirk I'd grown to hate over the past 6 months. She was dressed in her usual power outfit, tennis whites that somehow doubled as her real estate developer uniform, and she was pointing directly at my rooftop garden. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, an emergency room physician who'd spent the last decade saving lives, and this woman was about to destroy the one thing that had saved mine. But Patricia had no idea what she was really up against. See, what she didn't know, what nobody in our little planned community knew, was that my aesthetic violation was actually protected under federal law. And I was about to use every bit of my medical training to prove it. Hey, before I dive deeper into this insanity, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'm curious, do you have HOA horror stories about cultural gardens or family traditions getting attacked? Because after living through this nightmare, I'm convinced this stuff happens everywhere. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm a second-generation Chinese American whose parents sacrificed everything so I could become a doctor. For the past 15 years, I've been working 12-hour shifts in the Sacramento General Emergency Room, dealing with everything from heart attacks to overdoses to domestic violence cases that would make your stomach turn. But my real sanctuary wasn't the hospital. It was the rooftop garden my late wife Susan designed for us 3 years ago, before the cancer took her. Susan had grown up watching my grandmother tend to her medicinal plants, and she understood something that most people in our suburban neighborhood couldn't grasp. Those weren't just pretty flowers and herbs up there. Every single plant had been chosen for its healing properties, techniques passed down through 4 generations of Chen family women. My grandmother had smuggled some of those seeds from China in the 1960s, hidden in the lining of her coat during the most dangerous journey of her life. The ginseng, the chrysanthemum, the astragalus root, these weren't lawn ornaments, they were medicine. After Susan died 18 months ago, that garden became my lifeline. While I was trying to raise our 2 teenage daughters alone and process my own grief, tending to those plants kept me sane. But more than that, it connected me to something bigger than my pain. Neighbors started coming by. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door struggled with diabetes, and the bitter melon tea I made helped stabilize her blood sugar between doctor visits. Tom Bradley's wife dealt with chronic insomnia, and the chrysanthemum flowers I dried for her actually helped her sleep through the night for the first time in years. I wasn't practicing medicine up there. I was just sharing what my grandmother had taught me about nature's pharmacy. In my mind, it was the most American thing possible, an immigrant family's wisdom helping build community in our little corner of suburban California. Patricia Blackwood saw it differently. Patricia wasn't just our HOA president. She was a local real estate developer who'd managed to get herself elected to the board with one very specific agenda: transforming Riverside Meadows from a comfortable middle-class neighborhood into what she called a premium community destination. See, Patricia owned Blackwood Development Company, and she'd been quietly buying up land just outside our neighborhood boundaries for the past 2 years. Her master plan involved building luxury townhomes that would sell for twice what our houses were worth, but only if she could convince buyers that Riverside Meadows was an upscale enclave. That meant enforcing what she called aesthetic excellence standards. Translation: anything that didn't look like it belonged in a country living magazine spread had to go. Patricia stood about 5'4" in her tennis shoes, but she carried herself like she owned the world. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, even at 7 a.m. HOA enforcement walkthroughs. She drove a white BMW X5 that she parked diagonally across 2 spaces at every community meeting, as if the rules didn't apply to her. What made Patricia truly dangerous wasn't her money or her connections, though she had plenty of both from her previous stint on the city council. It was her absolute conviction that she was saving our neighborhood from decline. In her mind, every violation notice she sent, every fine she imposed, every family she harassed into compliance was an act of community service. The first time she knocked on my door was a Tuesday evening in March. I'd just gotten home from a brutal shift. We'd lost a motorcycle accident victim despite 3 hours of trying to save him, and I was up on the roof, finding peace among the emerging spring growth. "Dr. Chen?" Her voice carried that fake sweet tone that every ER doctor learns to recognize as a warning sign. "I'm Patricia Blackwood, your HOA president. We need to discuss your rooftop situation." Even from 2 stories up, I could see her nose wrinkled in distaste as she looked at what I considered my sanctuary. "I've received several complaints about the visual impact of your garden," she continued, somehow making the word sound like an obscenity. "It's creating what our architectural review committee classifies as visual pollution. Visual pollution. My wife's legacy, my family's 4-generation healing tradition, was visual pollution. That's when I knew Patricia Blackwood and I were going to have problems. The first official violation notice arrived exactly 1 week later, delivered by certified mail at 6:30 a.m. while I was getting my daughters ready for school. Notice of architectural violation was printed in bold red letters across the top of the letterhead. Below that, in Patricia's precise handwriting, was a detailed list of my crimes against suburban aesthetic harmony. Rooftop installation of non-approved vegetation creating visual disruption to neighborhood sightlines, the notice read. Violation of CCNR Section 4.7, external modifications must maintain community design standards and cannot detract from property values of adjacent homes. The letter gave me 30 days to remediate the violation by complete removal of unauthorized plantings. Failure to comply would result in daily fines of $50, escalating to $200 per day after 60 days. $50 a day, for growing medicine that helped my neighbors. I called the number listed for appeals and got Patricia's voicemail. Her message was professionally recorded, probably by the same company that did her real estate ads. You've reached Patricia Blackwood, HOA President and Principal of Blackwood Development. Your call is important to our Community Excellence Mission. Community Excellence Mission. Right. When she finally called me back 3 days later, her tone had shifted from fake sweet to barely contained irritation. Dr. Chen, I understand you have concerns about the violation notice, but our architectural standards exist for a reason. Your rooftop garden is visible from 17 different properties, and it's affecting the marketability of homes in our community. Mrs. Blackwood, these are medicinal plants that have been helping our neighbors. Mrs. Rodriguez's diabetes management has improved significantly since she started using the bitter melon tea and... Dr. Chen, she interrupted, what you're describing sounds like practicing medicine without proper oversight. Are you licensed to prescribe herbal remedies? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Of course, I wasn't licensed to prescribe herbal remedies. I was sharing traditional knowledge the same way someone might share a family recipe, but Patricia had found exactly the angle she needed to make me doubt myself. I'm not prescribing anything, I said carefully. I'm sharing plants the same way neighbors share tomatoes or advice about lawn care. That's not how our insurance company will see it if someone gets sick from your treatments, Patricia replied. But that's really beside the point. The architectural violation stands. 30 days, Dr. Chen. She hung up before I could respond. That night, I sat on my roof among the plants Susan had chosen, trying to figure out how to fight someone who seemed to hold all the cards. In the distance, I could see the construction lights from Patricia's development project where crews were working overtime to break ground on what she called Riverside Meadows Premium Estates. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. While she was destroying the actual character of our neighborhood, she was claiming my healing garden was the real threat to our community values. Patricia's next move came 2 weeks later, and it was pure genius in its calculated cruelty. I was working a night shift when my 16-year-old daughter, Emma, called me at the hospital, crying. Dad, there are people here taking pictures of the garden. They said neighbors are complaining about weird smells and bugs. I could hear my 14-year-old daughter, Lily, in the background, asking Emma what was happening. The garden wasn't just my connection to Susan, it was theirs, too. In those final months before the cancer one, Susan had spent hours up there with both girls, teaching them about each plant's properties, sharing stories about their great-grandmother's wisdom. Now Patricia was turning that sacred space into a source of fear and shame for my daughters. When I got home the next morning, there was a new violation notice waiting. This one was even more detailed than the first. Additional violations documented by Community Wellness Inspection Team, it read. Strong herbal odors detected beyond property boundaries. Potential pest attraction creating health hazards for neighboring families. Complaint filed with County Health Department regarding possible unlicensed medical practice. County Health Department. She'd actually called the County Health Department on me. The notice was signed by 5 neighbors, including Tom Bradley from across the street, which surprised me because Tom had always been friendly. His wife Martha had been one of the people benefiting from the chrysanthemum tea for her insomnia. I walked over to Tom's house that afternoon, still trying to process how quickly Patricia had turned my neighbors against me. Tom answered the door looking uncomfortable, like he'd been dreading this conversation. Marcus, look, I'm really sorry about signing that thing, he said before I could even speak. Patricia came by with this whole presentation about property values and liability issues. She said if someone got sick from your plants, everyone in the neighborhood could be liable for not reporting it. That's when I realized how sophisticated Patricia's campaign really was. She wasn't just sending violation notices, she was conducting psychological warfare, using people's fears about lawsuits and property values to isolate me from any potential allies. Tom, you know Mrs. Rodriguez's blood sugar has been better since she started drinking the bitter melon tea, and Martha's been sleeping through the night for the first time in years. I know, Tom said, looking genuinely conflicted, but Patricia showed us documentation about people getting sued when neighbors got sick from herbal stuff. She said your medical license doesn't cover prescribing plants. There it was again, that carefully crafted suggestion that I was somehow practicing medicine illegally by sharing traditional knowledge. I'm not prescribing anything, Tom. I'm sharing plants the same way your grandmother might have shared a remedy for a cold. Maybe, Tom said, but Patricia's got lawyers, Marcus, and she's talking about liens on properties if this escalates. Martha and I can't afford to get caught up in legal stuff. As I walked back to my house, I realized Patricia had successfully weaponized the very thing that made suburban communities work: people's desire to avoid conflict and protect their investments. But she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She'd assumed I was just another overwhelmed neighbor who would fold under pressure. She had no idea she was dealing with someone who'd spent 15 years making life-or-death decisions under extreme stress. The escalation continued over the next month like a slow-motion avalanche. Patricia's community wellness inspection team, which turned out to be herself, her assistant, and a guy with a camera who worked for her development company, documented every single plant on my roof. They measured sight lines from neighboring properties. They collected odor samples in little jars. The daily fines started exactly 31 days after the first violation notice, $50 a day, automatically charged to my HOA account with a promise to escalate to $200 per day if I didn't comply within another 30 days. Then Patricia got creative. She started showing up at the hospital where I worked, not as a patient, but as a concerned community member who wanted to discuss my outside medical activities with my supervisors. Dr. Sarah Kim, my attending, pulled me aside after Patricia's second visit to the administrative offices. Marcus, I don't know what's going on with your HOA situation, but this woman is suggesting you're operating some kind of unlicensed clinic out of your house. She's talking about liability issues and asking whether the hospital is aware of your activities. The genius of Patricia's strategy was becoming clear. She wasn't just attacking my garden, she was attacking my career, my reputation, and my ability to support my daughters. Sarah, I'm growing medicinal plants that I learned about from my grandmother. I've shared some teas with neighbors who asked about them. That's it. I believe you, Sarah replied, but she's got documentation, Marcus, photos, signed complaints, records of your HOA violations. She's making it sound like you're running some kind of alternative medicine practice without proper licensing. That weekend, Emma found me sitting in the garden at 2 a.m., just staring at the plants Susan had chosen with such care. Dad, why don't you just take it down? She asked quietly. It's causing so much stress, and Mom wouldn't want that. The question broke my heart because part of me was ready to give up. The fines were approaching $2,000. Patricia had successfully isolated me from most of my neighbors. She was threatening my career. But then I thought about my grandmother, who'd risked everything to bring these seeds to America. I thought about Susan, who'd spent her final months teaching our daughters about the healing wisdom their great-grandmother had preserved. And I thought about Mrs. Rodriguez, whose diabetes had genuinely improved since she'd started drinking the bitter melon tea. Emma, I said finally, sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing. Your great-grandmother knew that when she hid those seeds in her coat. Your mom knew that when she designed this garden while she was fighting cancer. But what if Patricia wins? What if she takes our house? That's when it hit me. Patricia wasn't just threatening my garden anymore. She was threatening my daughter's security, their home, their connection to their mother's memory, and that's when I decided to stop playing defense and start fighting back. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, while I was researching property law databases in the hospital break room during a quiet shift. I'd been trying to understand the legal basis for Patricia's architectural violations, diving deep into California HOA regulations and federal disability accommodation laws. What I found changed everything. First, I discovered that my medical license actually did give me unique standing to claim certain plants as medical necessities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The grief counseling I'd been receiving since Susan's death had documented my PTSD symptoms, and there was clear precedent for therapeutic gardens being classified as reasonable accommodations for mental health conditions. But that wasn't the real bombshell. While cross-referencing HOA expenditure records that Tom Bradley had quietly shared with me, he was the treasurer and had been growing suspicious of Patricia's financial management. I discovered something that made my blood pressure spike even as my ER-trained mind started calculating the strategic implications. Patricia's development company had been billing the HOA for neighborhood improvement consultations and aesthetic enhancement planning to the tune of $47,000 over the past 18 months. Essentially, she'd been using our HOA dues to pay her own company for services that directly benefited her luxury development project. In California, that's not just a conflict of interest, it's nonprofit fraud. I spent the next week quietly documenting everything. Financial records, email chains that Tom forwarded to me, photographs of the improvements that Patricia's company had been paid to plan, the tennis court resurfacing that happened to make our neighborhood more attractive to buyers of her premium townhomes, the landscaping changes that perfectly complemented her marketing materials, but I needed more than just financial irregularities. I needed to prove that my garden wasn't just a hobby that got out of hand. It was a legitimate medical necessity that was actually benefiting our community. That's where my medical training became invaluable. I started documenting everything with the same precision I used for patient charts in the ER, Mrs. Rodriguez's blood glucose readings before and after she started drinking bitter melon tea, Martha Bradley's sleep quality improvements tracked through a monitoring app. The reduction in minor ailment doctor visits among neighbors who'd been using chrysanthemum tea for seasonal allergies. What I discovered shocked even me. Over the past 18 months, neighbors who'd been using plants from my garden had collectively reduced their healthcare costs by an estimated $12,000. Mrs. Rodriguez's diabetes management had improved so significantly that her endocrinologist had reduced her prescription medication dosages. In medical terms, my aesthetic violation was actually providing measurable community health benefits. Now I had Patricia exactly where I wanted her. She'd been so focused on destroying my garden that she'd never considered it might be protected under federal disability law, and she'd been so confident in her power as HOA president that she'd gotten sloppy with the financial conflicts of interest. Time to go on the offense. The first shot across Patricia's bow came from an angle she never saw coming. I filed a formal complaint with the California Department of Consumer Affairs, documenting her company's financial relationship with the HOA while she served as president. Under California nonprofit law, board members can't use their positions to direct payments to their own businesses without full disclosure and community approval, neither of which had happened. Then I submitted a formal request for reasonable accommodation under the ADA, supported by documentation from my grief counselor, my primary care physician, and 3 independent medical studies on the therapeutic benefits of horticultural therapy for PTSD. But the move that really got Patricia's attention was when I sent copies of all my documentation to the Sacramento Bee's suburban development reporter, along with a detailed explanation of how HOA corruption was being used to facilitate gentrification in established neighborhoods. Patricia called me within 6 hours of the newspaper receiving my information packet. "Dr. Chen, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Her voice had lost all pretense of community-minded politeness. "I'm protecting my family's interests, Mrs. Blackwood, the same way you've been protecting yours. I don't know what you think you found, but making false accusations against community volunteers is a serious matter. Patricia, I've got 18 months of financial records showing your company billing our HOA for services that directly benefit your development project. That's nonprofit fraud." There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted to something closer to panic. Those were legitimate consulting fees for community improvement projects approved by the board. Approved by a board where you held the deciding vote, without disclosure of your financial interest? Patricia, I spent 4 years in pre-med studying research methodology. I know how to document evidence. Another pause. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want you to withdraw all violation notices related to my garden. I want the fines refunded, and I want you to resign from the HOA board." "That's not going to happen." "Then I guess we'll see how this plays out in the Sacramento Bee, and with the State Attorney General's office, and at the next community meeting where I'll be presenting all of this information to our neighbors." I hung up before she could respond. For the first time in months, I felt like I could actually win this thing. Patricia's counterattack came swift and vicious, exactly like I'd expected from someone whose entire empire was suddenly under threat. First, she accelerated the fine schedule, jumping directly to $200 per day and filing a lien notice against my house. In her mind, if she could force me into financial crisis quickly enough, I'd have to abandon my legal challenges just to avoid losing my home. Then she got personal. She contacted the medical board, filing a formal complaint alleging that I was practicing medicine without proper oversight by providing herbal remedies to neighbors. She submitted photos of my garden, copies of my violation notices, and sworn statements from neighbors claiming I had prescribed various plant-based treatments, but her most calculated move was calling Child Protective Services. The CPS worker who showed up at my door was a tired-looking woman named Janet Martinez who clearly didn't want to be there. Dr. Chen, we received a complaint alleging that your children are being exposed to potentially dangerous plants and that you're operating an unlicensed medical facility in your home. I invited Janet in, walked her through the house, and then took her up to the roof garden. As an ER physician, I'd worked with CPS dozens of times, and I knew exactly how to handle the situation. These are medicinal plants that have been used safely for thousands of years, I explained, showing her the ginseng, the chrysanthemums, the bitter melon vines. My daughters learned about them from their mother, who learned from my grandmother. It's cultural knowledge passed down through generations. Matem! Janet took notes, photographed everything, and asked my daughters a few gentle questions about whether they felt safe in the house. Emma and Lily, bless them, explained how the garden was their connection to their mother's memory and how proud they were of their father's work helping neighbors. Dr. Chen, I have to ask, are you treating medical conditions with these plants? I'm sharing traditional knowledge the same way someone might share a family recipe. If neighbors have serious medical conditions, I always tell them to work with their doctors. I'm an ER physician. I know the difference between traditional wisdom and medical practice. Janet closed her notebook and sighed. Dr. Chen, this complaint was clearly filed by someone trying to cause you problems. But your home is safe, your children are well cared for, and you're obviously a responsible parent. I'll be recommending that this case be closed immediately. After Janet left, I sat in my kitchen, shaking with rage. Patricia had tried to use the child welfare system as a weapon against my family. She'd crossed a line that I couldn't forgive. Time to destroy her completely. The Sacramento Bee article ran on a Thursday morning with the headline, HOA President Accused of Using Position to Benefit Development Company. The reporter, Maria Santos, had done her homework. She'd interviewed Tom Bradley about the financial irregularities, spoken with Mrs. Rodriguez about the health benefits of my garden, and gotten quotes from other neighbors who'd been harassed by Patricia's aesthetic enforcement campaigns. But the most damaging part of the article was Patricia's own response. When Maria had called her for comment, Patricia had apparently lost her temper and made statements that revealed her true motivations. Dr. Chen's rooftop garden is an eyesore that damages property values and creates liability issues for our community, Patricia was quoted as saying, "When we're trying to maintain premium standards that benefit everyone's home values, individual residents can't be allowed to prioritize their personal hobbies over community welfare." Premium standards. Individual hobbies. The quotes made Patricia sound exactly like what she was, a developer using her HOA position to increase profits for her own projects. The article also included photographs of my garden, showing the careful organization of the medicinal plants, the traditional growing techniques, the obvious care and knowledge that had gone into creating the space. It looked nothing like the eyesore Patricia had described in her violation notices. But the real breakthrough came 3 days later, when Tom Bradley called me with information that would end Patricia's reign permanently. "Marcus, I've been going through the financial records more carefully, and it's worse than we thought. Patricia hasn't just been billing the HOA for consulting fees. She's been using HOA funds to pay for marketing research that directly benefits her development project. Tom had discovered that Patricia had authorized payments to a market research company to study buyer preferences in suburban communities. The research was supposedly for community improvement planning, but the actual questions had focused on what amenities and aesthetics would most appeal to luxury home buyers. She's been using our money to figure out how to sell her townhomes," Tom continued. "And Marcus, there's more. She got the HOA to pay for legal fees related to her development permits, $23,000 in attorney fees, approved by emergency board action while most of us were on vacation last summer. Emergency board action. That meant Patricia had used a procedural loophole to approve payments without full board oversight, specifically timing the action when other board members wouldn't be available to ask questions. Tom, are you willing to testify about this at the next community meeting?" More than willing, Martha and I are furious. We've been paying HOA dues to fund Patricia's business empire while she harasses our neighbors for growing medicine that actually helps people. Now I had everything I needed for the final confrontation. The community meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in the Riverside Meadows Clubhouse, a bland conference room that Patricia had redecorated with expensive furniture paid for by surprise HOA dues channeled through her interior design consulting company. I'd spent 2 weeks preparing for this moment like I was preparing for a medical board examination. Every document organized, every piece of evidence cross-referenced, every legal argument researched and verified. Patricia arrived exactly on time, dressed in a navy blue business suit that screamed serious professional. She'd brought her assistant, a nervous-looking man named Derek, who carried a leather briefcase like he was handling state secrets. The room filled with about 30 neighbors, which was actually a great turnout for a community meeting. Mrs. Rodriguez was there, along with Martha Bradley and several other people who'd benefited from plants from my garden. But Patricia had her supporters too, mostly newer residents who'd bought into her premium community vision. Patricia called the meeting to order with the kind of formal authority that she'd perfected over months of using HOA procedure to shut down any opposition. Before we begin tonight's agenda, I want to address the false and defamatory accusations that have been made against me in the local media, she began. Dr. Chen has been spreading malicious lies about community board operations in an attempt to avoid accountability for his architectural violations. Patricia, I interrupted, standing up from my seat in the back row, I think our neighbors deserve to hear the full story before you start with damage control. Dr. Chen, you'll have an opportunity to speak during the public comment period. Actually, Patricia, I think I'll speak now. I walked to the front of the room, carrying a box of documents that I'd organized with the same precision I used for patient files in the ER. Neighbors, my name is Marcus Chen. Some of you know me as the ER doctor who grows medicinal plants on his roof. Others know me as the guy who's been fighting Patricia's violation notices for the past 6 months. I looked around the room, making eye contact with people I'd lived near for 7 years. What you don't know is that Patricia has been using your HOA dues to fund her private development company while simultaneously harassing families who don't fit her vision of what our neighborhood should look like. Patricia started to object, but Tom Bradley stood up from his seat in the middle of the room. Marcus is telling the truth, Tom said. I'm the HOA treasurer, and I've been tracking these financial irregularities for months. Patricia's company has received over $70,000 in payments from our HOA account over the past 18 months. A murmur went through the room. $70,000 was real money, enough to resurface every sidewalk in the neighborhood. Those were legitimate consulting fees, Patricia said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. Consulting fees for what, exactly? I asked, pulling out the first document from my box. Market research to determine what amenities luxury homebuyers prefer? Legal fees for your development permits? Interior design services for your sales office? I walked around the room, handing copies of the financial records to neighbors. Every single payment was approved by emergency board action, specifically timed when other board members were unavailable to ask questions. And every single payment benefited Patricia's development project, not our community. Mrs. Rodriguez raised her hand. Marcus, what about your garden? Patricia said it was creating health hazards. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. Mrs. Rodriguez, how has your diabetes been since you started drinking the bitter melon tea? Much better, she replied. My doctor was amazed at my last appointment. My blood sugar has been more stable than it's been in years. I turned to Martha Bradley. Martha, how's your insomnia been since you started using the chrysanthemum tea? I've been sleeping through the night for the first time in a decade, Martha said. My doctor asked what I was doing differently because my stress levels had improved so dramatically. I pulled out another set of documents. I've documented the community health benefits of plants from my garden over the past 18 months. Collectively, neighbors who've used these traditional remedies have reduced their healthcare costs by over $12,000. Mrs. Rodriguez's endocrinologist has been able to reduce her prescription medications. 3 families have avoided urgent care visits for seasonal allergies. I looked directly at Patricia. My rooftop garden isn't creating health hazards. It's providing measurable health benefits to our community. And under the Americans with Disabilities Act, it's protected as a reasonable accommodation for PTSD related to my wife's death. Patricia's face had gone pale. You can't just claim ADA protection for any hobby you want to pursue. Actually, Patricia, I can. I have documentation from 3 medical professionals confirming that horticultural therapy is a recognized treatment for PTSD. I have 18 months of evidence showing the therapeutic benefits of maintaining this garden, and I have legal precedent supporting gardens as reasonable accommodations. I pulled out the final document from my box. I also have a formal complaint filed with the California Attorney General's office documenting your conflicts of interest, your misuse of HOA funds, and your violation of nonprofit regulations. The room had gone completely silent. So here's what's going to happen, Patricia. You're going to resign from the HOA board immediately. Your company is going to repay every dollar it received from HOA funds, and you're going to withdraw all violation notices related to my garden. Patricia looked around the room, realizing that she'd lost the support of neighbors she'd counted on to back her authority. And if I refuse? Then the Attorney General's investigation will proceed, the Sacramento Bee will continue following this story, and I'll file a federal lawsuit under the ADA for harassment and discrimination. Patricia gathered her papers, whispered something to Derek, and walked toward the door. This isn't over, Dr. Chen. Yes, Patricia, I said. It is. Patricia Blackwood resigned from the HOA board the following Tuesday, submitting a brief letter citing personal commitments that require her full attention. Her development company repaid $73,000 to the HOA account over the next month, though the payments came with a legal agreement preventing the community from pursuing further claims. The violations against my garden were officially withdrawn, and the fines were refunded in full, but the real victory was what happened next. Within 6 months, 3 other families in Riverside Meadows had started their own medicinal gardens, inspired by the documentation I'd shared about community health benefits. Mrs. Rodriguez started teaching her granddaughter about traditional plant medicine. Tom Bradley began growing herbs that helped with his arthritis. The California Department of Consumer Affairs launched an investigation into HOA governance practices in suburban communities, using Patricia's case as a model for the kind of conflicts of interest that needed stronger oversight. Most importantly, my daughters got to keep their connection to their mother's memory and the healing wisdom that their great-grandmother had risked everything to preserve. Emma now helps me dry chrysanthemums every fall, the same way Susan taught her. Lily has started keeping detailed notes about which plants help which neighbors, continuing the tradition of careful observation that goes back 4 generations in our family. As for Patricia, her luxury development project stalled when potential buyers started asking questions about the HOA corruption scandal. Last I heard, she'd moved to Arizona to pursue what she called new opportunities in community development. The rooftop garden is bigger now, expanded to include 3 raised beds that neighbors helped me build. On Saturday mornings, you'll find me up there with Mrs. Rodriguez and Martha Bradley and a rotating group of people from the community sharing plant wisdom and building the kind of neighborhood that Patricia never understood was possible. Sometimes the most powerful weapon you have is simply knowing who you are, what you stand for, and being willing to fight for what's right. My grandmother knew that when she hid those seeds in her coat. Susan knew that when she designed our healing garden while fighting cancer, and now my daughters know it too. Thanks for reading this story. If you've dealt with HOA overreach in your own community, drop a comment and let me know how you handled it. And if you want to hear more stories about people fighting back against corrupt neighborhood associations, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, there are plenty more where this came from.